Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to my latest Eternal Reviews video series. Today we're gonna start the card-by-card set review for Limited and Constructed of the new set, the Dusk Road, that just dropped yesterday. So strap in and let's get started with the Fire Faction first. Alright, so let's just do this card by card. Okay, so we have the Granite Waystone. It's one of the better Waystones, honestly, especially with the all the new Grenadin synergies. So if you have 4 fire after you play this, like if you have 3 or more fire, and then play this, you get a 1/1 Grenadin, but you get it in your hand, not in play, and it costs 1, just like all the regular Grenadin tokens that you get. In Limited, this is like okay-ish. In Constructed, this is probably a bit better because you can build your deck around Grenadin synergies and to take advantage of the extra body with sacrifice effects and stuff. So this is a pretty nice card. It might also be appealing in some aggressive decks, like Stone Scar Gidolis, for example, might be interested in this card getting like a free 1/1 on turn 4. Seems fairly appealing potentially. But yeah, nothing too big, but it's nice to have some more options in terms of flood protection and utility. Next we have Helpful Doorbot. The card right now is basically useless in Constructed and Limited. Maybe there will be some use for it, like some way to abuse a 0-cost unit, but for now, nothing. Next we have Iceberg Frontrunner. This actually is surprisingly decent simply because it's a Yeti and it has 2 health. Like with Wump, this turns into a 2/3, which is a pretty good base deadline to match up in combat against a bunch of other things. But all in all, it's not that exciting, and I think especially in Limited, a 1/2 charge, even as a Yeti, not going to be good enough. Next we have Caleb's Intervention. It's basically a 1-cost Grenadin, or gives one of your units +2/+2 and overwhelm this turn. Keep in mind, it's a spell, not a fast spell, so this is not a combat trick, it's just a way to deal 2 or more damage to the opponent. Like if they have a small jump blocker, it deals more than 2 damage. If they have no blocker, it just deals 2 extra damage. But yeah, it's like clearly the worst ability, but it can come in handy to like push through critical damage. And last but not least, kill an enemy weapon. I mean, it is not ruined, so it cannot kill curses or non-weapon relics, but it can still kill weapons and relic weapons, so that's decent. But all in all, the card is in a bit of a weird place, because the first 2 abilities are something that aggressive decks care more about, but aggressive decks, especially like small aggressive decks, usually don't care much about weapons, be it relic weapons or otherwise. So not sure how much use this card is gonna have. Probably not that much, if you ask me. Because as a sideboard card, there are better options than as a main deck card. I don't see anyone wanting this. And next we have Candlemaster. This is a pretty sweet one. We already had that in the previews. In like a very spell-heavy deck, this card is potentially pretty nice. It's a bit fragile, but creating a 2/2 charge Reckless Hound each turn is super powerful, and there's a lot of cheap spells to turn this on. This is not easy to figure out what best to do with this card, but it definitely has the power level to make it in Constructed theoretically. Practically we'll have to see what best to do with it and if we can like break it in a way. In Limited, this is probably a bit too hard to turn on and unreliable and fragile and so on. Next we have Scrap Hound, a new Grenadin, actually a pretty nice one. It's basically just a 1/1 Grenadin for 1 with a pretty sweet ultimate that reads pay 4, sacrifice another unit to give Scrap Hound +2/+2. If it was a Grenadin, Scrap Hound gets +4/+4 instead. So basically in a Grenadin synergy deck, this has a pretty good ultimate comparable to Pyro Knight, except that it's 2 cheaper and costs you 1 of your throwaway Grenadins, which is not that big of a deal. So this is a pretty decent unit. I'm just not sure if the Grenadin deck will play out in a way if there's one that cares about this type of card. But power level wise, the card's pretty sweet. Like, this might be interesting in G-Dolus once again in some amount, but not sure. Because I mean, we have Grenadin Drone and Assembly Line in the deck already, so we have support for the ultimate, and the ultimate is pretty nice and very affordable at 4. And a 5/5 is nothing to sneeze at. Beats most units. And in limited, this looks also pretty appealing if you have the support, because a 5/5, a 1-drop that turns into a 5/5 on turn 4 potentially, is a pretty good unit in limited. Next we have the Combustion Cell from the promo card. This card is pretty interesting. I mean, throwing away units is always sort of a thing, but Grenadins come semi-free in swarms basically, so they are not that big of a loss. You're not losing like a full card, you're losing a fraction of a card. And being able to ramp for +2, basically like a Kindle, is pretty nice. Unlike Kindle, it doesn't ramp you the turn you play it, but you can play it so that it is free the turn you play it, and then you get a Kindle every turn after that you sack a Granite into it. It also provides sack outlets for cards like Madness and stuff, so that's worth keeping in mind. And there's a bunch of higher cost Granadin synergy things that this cares about as well. Next we have another Grenadin Disassembler. When one of your Grenadins, including Disassembler, dies, deal 1 damage to the enemy player. It's interesting that they put that clarification in here, because I would think it's pretty clear given like Argenport Instigator doesn't have that phrasing and deals damage for itself. But okay. So yeah, this is actually pretty interesting for like kind of a stally, jump blocky Grenadin sack deck. Like if you have 1 or 2 of these out, that can escalate pretty quickly. There are cards like Brimstone, Altar, and it's a 2/2 for 2, that's also decent. So yeah, this looks like a potentially interesting piece for like a Grenadin tribal deck. In limited, not sure. Like a 2/2 for 2 might still be okay, especially if you have a couple of Grenadins, but it's nothing to be excited about. Next we have Into the Furnace. Deal 2 damage to a unit. If you have a Grenadin in your void, Into the Furnace deals double damage. This card seems pretty exciting. Getting like a 2-power deal 4 in fire seems pretty great. The Grenadin deck might be very happy about it, depending on how it looks, to round out its removal suit. But it might fall short because there's too many good options between like all the Madness stuff and shadow removal that this might not make the cut, but in theory it's pretty good. Like I could easily see this kind of being better than Torch in the Grenadin deck, because you don't care about relic weapons much with all your tokens, and this is a better removal because it kills a lot more things. Miner's Musket, this is a pretty interesting one. So this is basically a Talon of Nostrix that has 1 less armor, and as a summon reduces the cost of the top unit or relic of your deck by 2. So basically sort of a out of the vault effect on your next relic or unit. It's not relic weapon, it's relic in general, and not weapon in general, so it doesn't reduce non-relic weapons, but it uses non-weapon relics. What a tongue twister. The card is interesting. I mean, it's very limited in what it kills, like it doesn't even kill all 2-drops. But the fact that it's effectively ramping you, like ramping the next unit or relic that you draw, could be pretty interesting. Like there are a bunch of like interesting cards that to be affected by this and all. This is definitely an effect to keep in mind and look if there's enough value and abuse potential for it. But off the top of my head, I don't know right away what to do with it. In limited, it's about as good as Talon, a bit better maybe. Next we have Oni Cave Diver. Oni Cave Diver has +2 attack while you have a relic. And she's an explorer, so there are some synergies there. Like there is Mysterium Orb that wants Explorers, and it's also Relics, so you can play this on turn 2, then play Mysterium Orb on turn 3, then you suddenly have a 4-2 for 2, which is nothing to sneeze at, and your Mysterium Orb produces +1 maximum power, and then there's like a bit of a weird fringe ultimate put in here, pay 2 to Scout to give her some utility and help you with some card selection when your deck is all rampy and lots of power and a couple of big threats. But yeah, I mean, in limited, I think this card is pretty nice. In constructed, it may or may not make a splash, but it's definitely not gonna be an easy inclusion in anything. But it might be just good enough if you can pull off the synergies and find the right home for it, because the power level once again is there. Next we have Sparkcatcher, Grenadin Drone's big brother and another possibly essential piece for like a Grenadin sacrifice tribal deck. It's basically 2-cost 2/1 Grenadin that gives you a 1/1 Grenadin when it dies. So more 2-for-1 Grenadin type cards are always welcome in these types of decks, especially with Gear Cruncher caring about Grenadins in your void, Torrent of Spiders and stuff like that, so pretty sweet card. Might make me wanna crack out my good old Stonescar Callus. Okay, on to the next batch. Next we have Unpredictable Outlaw. This card is amazing. I can't tell you how incredible this card is. In constructed, this is a potential monster. Keep in mind, this triggers every time you play a weapon on it. Like, you can play 2 cheap weapons in a turn, exhaust 2 blockers, and then attack with your whole team. This card is the dream of every hyper-aggressive deck. It's such an innocuous and such a powerful and incredible 2-drop. The only thing keeping this in check basically is endurance units like Chthon and Titan, for example, or Mysterium Orb generating endurance and stuff like that. But yeah, just amazing card. And in limited, this is also super abusable. You can easily draft a weapon-centric, gunslinger-centric, aggressive deck with this card, and this is just gonna like swing games left and right. The card is a common monster. Alright, next we have Yeti Sage. We talked about that in the preview already. It has double damage as a Yeti, so Womp effectively turns it into a 4-2, and if it dies you draw a Trail Stories, and the best use for Trail Stories that I can see in like a aggressive Yeti tribal deck is helping to support Obliterate without having to play extra power to play Obliterate, like being able to play 25 power and for Yeti Sages to play 4 Obliterates and be reasonably likely to cast them, unlike these absurd 25 power decks with 4 Obliterates and 2 Soulfire Drakes and nothing else to support them that deserve to have their 5 drops rot in their hand every time that happens, because it's just so greedy. The math just doesn't back it up. And in limited, I mean, it's a decent 2-drop, nothing super exciting, but it's effectively a 2-1 with some neat upside, so might fill out your curve. Or if you have some synergies like weapons to put on it, it might even be better than the random 2-drop that you normally might play. Next we have a Backpacker's Machete. Pretty decent limited card. +2/+2 in Scout, it's pretty nice. You compare it to Katana, it's definitely worse. Like Katana gives you half the stats, like no survivability, but replaces itself, and this gives you like the survivability but only Scout. Like if this would cost 2, or would have 1 stat point more at 3, like a 3-2 for example, or 3, and Scout, it would be much more appealing. This way I think it's not a constructed card, but a decent, like an okay limited weapon, especially if you care about weapon synergies like with Unpredictable Outlaw and stuff. And Scout is always nice and limited, especially. Next we have Cold Scrounger. This is one of them less sacrifice oriented, more like aggressive tribal Grenadine cards. Basically Goblin King, if you want. It's a double fire 3-drop 2/2. The weather's getting to me. Your other Grenadines have +1 attack, so definitely worse than Goblin King and Magic would be. No health boost. And Entomb, put a firebomb into the enemy deck. Not super impressive. Entomb is just kind of negligible. And yeah, in limited, this might actually be a bit better than in constructed if you have a bunch of Grenadines, because I'm not sure if in constructed this is the direction Grenadines want to be going, also because this is like pretty fragile. Next we have Fire Shot Rioter. This is a 3-cost 3/2 that with Gunslinger ally gets a +1/+1 weapon, so becomes a 4/3. So this is pretty decent. Like I think in limited this is a great 3-drop if you have the synergies, and in constructed this might barely be good enough to make it into like a Gunslinger themed deck, because a 4/3 for 3 is pretty decent stats, and if then if you have some synergies with the weapon on it, like there's this 2-drop that gets +1/+1 for each unit with a weapon on it, or the 4-drop that gets +2/+2 for each unit that is wielding a weapon, that like each friendly unit that is wielding a weapon, and so on. So these synergies might make this card constructed playable. Next we have Hoof Slash, basically Rampage's big brother. It 3-cost fast spell +4/+2, no overwhelm. Not very excited about this. It's just way too expensive. Like 2-cost combat tricks are already problematic. 3-cost combat tricks are like unplayable, especially at such a bad rate. This card is so much worse than Rampage. Like we get +1/+1 for +1 cost and even lose the overwhelm, which would be more appealing here than with Rampage. But yeah, there is that. Limited, okay-ish, probably. Next we have Milos Isalio, Heir to the Rebellion. When Milos attacks while wielding a weapon, you get +2 power this turn. Once again, pretty weird ability on a rather aggressive unit, but with a Gunslinger ally, he has double damage, so he's effectively a 4/3 then. And then if you put weapons on it, the weapon stats are basically, like the weapon attack stats are basically doubled thanks to the double damage, making him a supreme weapon carrier. But not sure if the guy is actually gonna be good enough. There's a lot of good 3-drops now. So I looked into some Gunslinger type stuff and I wasn't sure if I want to even like play him. Alright, next we have Purge the Darkness. This is like a weird direct damage burn spell. Just deals 4 damage to the enemy player and ends the night. So basically you let them make it night, then you draw your card, and then you purge the darkness so they don't draw their card and they take 4 damage and they lose their night benefits like the stun effect from Winter's Grasp, the lifesteal from Rindra and so on. But yeah, this seems so specific and so on that it doesn't seem worth it. The rate of 4 damage for 3 is also not a great burn damage rate, and I don't see a purely burn deck working out in this game. I don't think they want these like super unfun, uninteractive, just count to 25, throw damage at their face type decks. Also, the opponent having 5 health more in this game makes it harder. And in limited, this seems even worse. Next we have Ruby Catalyst. Once per turn you may pay 2 to exhaust an enemy unit. After the 3rd use, sacrifice Ruby Crystal Catalyst to play a 5/4 Sentinel. I think in constructed this is probably going to be a bit too slow and clunky, but in limited this seems pretty good. Like this seems pretty interesting. It's still a bit slow, clunky, but the 5/4 is going to matter a lot, and the games are a little less fast and dedicated, so that this might be good enough, but I'm not sure, because it's still kind of an effect that you care more in an aggressive deck with the exhausting enemy units, and it's pretty expensive for that. And the 5/4 is coming at a point where it doesn't matter that much anymore. Next we have Ruin Crawler Yeti. Kill an enemy attachment, so this is a really sweet sideboard card. We finally got our 3-cost 2/2 that kills an artifact for all the Magic players watching. And it actually is much better than these cards in Magic, because it's actually a relevant tribe. And when Ruin Crawler Yeti hits the enemy player, it gets +1 attack, so this keeps growing. So it actually also snowballs pretty nice. So yeah, this is a really sweet sideboard card and might even have main deck appeal. And a limited, great card, I would say. Pretty good card. There's enough attachments usually, and it's a reasonable threat on its own and so on. Like the card. Next we have Scrap Heap. Your Grenadin have charge. Seems pretty so-so, especially given how small most of them are, and that this thing costs 3 to deploy. And then once per turn you may pay 5 to play a 1/1 Grenadin. That's also super slow and expensive. This card, not very appealing. Next we have Skycrack Huntsman. So that's a 1/4 Explorer and Gunslinger. You may pay 4 exhaust Skycrack Huntsman to deal 1 damage to an enemy if you have a relic. This seems so bad, like, I mean, there's Stormsinger, she's like a 0/2 or 4 that does that without condition and just for exhausting. This costs 4 more and requires you to have a relic, just because it costs 3 and is a 1/4. This is so bad. Like in limited it might be okay because of the synergies and because it is a decent blocker, and the ping 1 has more impact, but geez, is that card like underpowered. Alright, next we have Temple Raider, an Explorer, 2/2 charge, and with Sentinel Ally it becomes a 4/4. So this is actually pretty nice, like stab-wise. This is incredible, like 4/4 charge for 3 is great. The main problem is it will rarely be a 4/4 charge by turn 3, or I'm not sure if it can even ever be. It might be like turn 2 Copper Conduit, turn 3 this guy, but that's not a good line. And yeah, in limited this is even better, basically. And yeah, this card might have potential to be abused in like a Sentinel Explorer constructed deck, like a more proactive one, less rampy. Next we have the Topple Tower, or Grenadin synergies, another more beatdowny Grenadin thing. It gets +2 attack for each Grenadin in your void. Grenadins go into the void easy. It's very susceptible to silence though. 4 health is a good benchmark for a 3-drop. Might be just interesting and good enough to consider in a Grenadin deck, depending on how the deck looks, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of options actually. They put out a ton of Grenadins. Next we have Tumblebang. This is kind of a weird and interesting one. So you get +3 power this turn, and it's a 3-cost 3/1 Grenadin. So basically turn 2 Combustion Cell, turn 3 this guy means turn 4 you get to have 9 power if you want, and if both are still alive. Problem is if this dies during the enemy turn you get 3 power that you probably can't do a whole lot with. So seems iffy. But it's an interesting card to keep in mind to try and break and do unfair things with. Next we have Ancient Defenses. When you play a Sentinel it gets +2 attack. And that is a permanent buff, so that's pretty nice. 4 is a lot to deploy, but the summon effect deals 3 damage to an enemy, be it player or unit. Kind of makes up for it, so it's basically like a clunky deal 3 with a relevant upside that also helps boost bond stuff, and it's a relic for relic synergies. So this card might barely be good enough to end up seeing play. Not sure though, like it's still a bit overcosted and stuff, but it's an interesting way to balance the cost and deploying a speculative relic with an immediate onboard impact. I like the design here. Not sure if the card itself is gonna be good enough or not. In limited I think it's gonna be much better for sure, because the 4-cost deal 3 alone is already pretty decent in limited. And random stat boosts probably matter more there as well, with less dedicated removal and stuff. Next we have Barbarian Camp. Poor man's Obelisk. I wonder if this could be good enough to put into a token deck, like Praxis tokens. Your units have +1 attack, 4/4, and it's a relic. I mean, it might. Not sure though. Also seems a bit expensive. But we will see. In limited, this, once again, probably better than in constructed. Might be interesting in both. Next we have Hellfire Oni. When you play a weapon on Hellfire Oni, play an additional copy of that weapon on her. That only works once, because it's an ultimate, and she's a 4-cost 3/3, and she's a gunslinger and an Oni. There are some Oni synergies, there are some gunslinger synergies, and yeah, she's pretty good with, say, Shogun Scepter on her, or Hammer of Might, or Plate. Problem is, she's also a 3/3, so pretty fragile and silenceable. But maybe worth experimenting with her, because she can do some really powerful things, especially the Plate, like Hellfire Oni into Plate. Deepforge Plate looks pretty strong, so might be worth experimenting with this. And in limited, even better, if you have a bunch of good weapons. She can be quite a beast, I think, and she's like harder immediately shut down in limited usually than in constructed. Speaking of Oni synergies, there's Kyojun, Grand Shugo. It's a 3/2 Warcry 2. It's an Oni, has double fire of 4. And your other Oni have +2/+2. And when he hits the enemy player, play a 2/2 Oni Ronin. So if you can clear the path for this, this can get out of hand quickly. Looks like a fragile potential limited bomb and a potential build around in constructed. Warcry 2 is pretty strong and all the other abilities are too. The stat line is fragile, but between Warcry, weapons, tricks and removal, it might be possible to make him work well enough that he is actually a powerful constructed card as well. Next we have Stone Scar Sawed Off. So this is basically like the Stone Scar answer of Peacekeepers to Peacekeepers Prod. Exhaust instead of stun, but single fire instead of triple justice, and 4/1 stats instead of 3/2 stats, which suits the more aggressive nature of fire a lot better. So this is a pretty good limited card, I would say. Very swingy, like it better than the 3/2 Warcry that exhausts an enemy unit. That was already a pretty good card on turn 4 in aggressive decks, and this is better, especially with all the weapon synergies, and this might even be appealing and constructed in some scenarios, like in a mono fire aggro deck, for example, that is like weapons centered. Putting this on an unpredictable outlaw, for example, is brutal. Turns it into a 6/3 and exhausts 2 blockers. That's really hard to like keep up with, because 2 blockers are often all you have on turn 4. Next we have Wandering Forge. So it's a 4/2 for 4 and a 5/3 overwhelm when you have a relic, and it's a sentinel. Looks like a pretty solid limited card, not much of a constructed card. Next we have Hot Barrel Revolver. Deal 3 damage to a random enemy. If you play it on a gunslinger, you can choose the target. +3/+3 for 5. It's a bit iffy. Shooting 3 damage, killing like an enemy unit or relic weapon. On the other hand, might be quite good. This is like a better version of the Hellfire thing, like the 6 cost +3/+3 deal 3. And yeah, might be decent. Like I think constructed it might just still be a bit too weak and overcosted, but in limited this seems really good. Seems like a great rare in a weapon-based gunslinger deck. Next we have Inner Fire. Play a 5/5 Infernus for 5, and for each of your Grenadin you may pay 2 and exhaust it to play an additional Infernus. There is a whole cycle of these cards, and honestly I think this is by far the worst, because it doesn't generate any value, it just generates like random damage in an archetype that is probably not that much about damage to begin with, because the Grenadins seem more like utilitarian and grindy, swarmy than actually aggressive, so this card is, I think, terrible in both formats. Just crap rare. Next we have Jack Hunted Fugitive. Already talked about this in a recent spoiler review. Card is a bomb in Constructed and Limited. Just have to see what best to do with him in Constructed. But yeah, he's a beast. Also happens to be a gunslinger, which is nice. Next we have Power Pet Sentry. 5 cost 4/3 Sentinel. It's a 5/4 while you have a relic, and it deals 3 damage to the enemy player and 3 damage to an enemy unit with flying. To be fair, in Constructed I think that's not gonna be good enough. Stats are a bit on the weak side. Summon is pretty conditional and so on. But in Limited this looks like it's probably still gonna be pretty good. To above that even, but in Constructed I don't really see it. Powder Keg Rider, 5 cost 3/4 with Overwhelm, and ultimate when one of your other Grenadian dies, Powder Keg Rider gets +4 attack. So it's basically a 5 cost 7/4 Overwhelm conditionally, but the condition is fairly easy to meet. So in Limited this looks decent, in Constructed it's probably too underpowered. 4 health is like fragile and it's just kind of a weird card. Staff of the Archmagister. It's a 5 cost double fire weapon that gives the wielder +1/+1 for each spell in your void. Might have some potential to be built around, used in like a Skycrack spell-based tempo deck, maybe with like Vadius, Caleb, Fevered Scout, and stuff like that, and a ton of spells, but not sure. Maybe in small numbers it might make it in there. In Limited, I don't think you will usually have enough spells to make this worthwhile. Next we have Barkeep's Friend. Create and draw a 1/1 weapon on Entomb, and itself is a 6 cost 4/2 relic weapon. The weapon that it creates is a weapon, not a relic weapon. So it buffs a unit. Card is a bit weird, like in Constructed it's clearly not playable. In Limited it might be okay as a filler. 6 cost for 4/2 weapon still seems a bit iffy, even if it gives you like a +1/+1. So basically for 7 you can immediately use it, dies, you get the weapon, then you get a 4/2 relic weapon and a 4/2 relic weapon and a +1/+1 boost permanently to one of you, with some turning on some weapon synergies in the process. But yeah, a fringe synergy role player in Limited, I'd say. Next we have Molten Fist, another 6-drop relic weapon. It has attack equal to your armor, so if you like lose armor, you also lose punch on your Molten Fist. Card is interesting at least to keep an eye on and see if it's like worth putting in decks and messing around with, because there are some nice synergies, like Throne Warden into this gives you a 10/10 weapon turn 6 for example, which looks pretty powerful, but there's always like Stonescar Daisho, Starsteel Daisho to compete with, so that's tough to compete with honestly, for what you want to be doing. Next we have Oni Gunrite. It's a 5/3 for 6 Gunslinger Ally Warcry, so it's basically a 6 cost 5/3 Warcry potentially, and when it dies you draw a weapon from your void. I would say this is too weak stat-wise. Warcry on a 6-drop is super bad because the game is already like way too far along for Warcry to have enough impact. Warcry is only good on early cards, I think, and drawing a weapon from your void is like meh. So yeah, in Limited might be okay-ish, in Constructed terrible. Next we have Sky Terror, Flying Warcry. Speaking of Warcry and expensive cards, 6/5 flying for 6 double fire. When Sky Terror attacks, exhaust all enemy units without flying. So this is like kind of a nice alpha strike unit. It's just a bit slow and expensive for a 6-drop, because the decks that would love this are more aggressive decks, and for that you would want it to be at most a 5-drop, and then have sort of a Sundermore Hellkite type of card that would make it pretty interesting. This way I'm not sure if and how much use it gonna have in constructed. I mean, 6 cost 6/5 flying Warcry is pretty decent, even though the Warcry is kind of like meh. In limited, this is kind of a bomb, like a pretty good bomb. Next we have Sure Shot. Sure Shot is a 6/5 gunslinger for 6, double fire again. She gets +3/+3 for each weapon she's wielding, and if she has 18 or more attack, she has Overwhelm. Once again, probably not a constructed card, but potentially very powerful in limited. Like if you have enough weapons, you can kind of just sit back behind her, build her up with some weapons, and just rush the enemy player in a turn or two. So pretty solid limited card. Next we have Tempered Sentinel. 6 cost 5/3 charge bond. This is pretty nice because a lot of the sentinels are overstated. Like you can go turn 5, Sandstorm Titan plus this, attack with this, or turn 6, Heart of the Vault, and then bond Heart of the Vault to play this and attack and so on. There are some like interesting options here, and yeah, for a more aggressive, less rampy Sentinel Explorer deck that I talked about earlier with the Temple Raider, this might be just a card you want. Going for some bond chains and stuff. And in limited, this is probably even better. Next we have Gear Cruncher, the top end of the Grenadin deck. You get a 1/1 Grenadin for each Grenadin in a Void, which is probably going to be quite a lot by that time, so this is like often going to fill a lot of your board just by itself. And then if it survives and doesn't get silenced, you can pay 3 and exhaust Gear Cruncher to deal 1 damage to an enemy unit for each of your Grenadins, which will basically just take over the board in quick fashion. So this is a bit fragile and expensive, but very brutal if alive and can easily take over the game. So definitely an interesting card to mess around with in Grenadin Tribal, and if you have enough Grenadin support, this is going to be a monster in limited if you have a bunch of Grenadin cards to feed it. Next we have Improvised Rubbler, 7 cost, triple fire, +5/+5 relic weapon, and on summon it plays 2 1/1 Grenadins, support like protecting itself basically. But yeah, +5 like a 5/5 relic weapon for 7, not great stats, even with the 2 1/1 Grenadins. Card is just too expensive and slow. Might be barely okay in limited depending on how slow the format is. Because like for limited the power level is decent, but in constructed this is just bad. Next we have Rock Carapace. So this is basically Roland's Fist of this set. 7 cost, double fire, +9/+9 weapon. The wielder can't fly. And at the end of your turn, if the wielder attacked, stun it. So this is super weird. Because like you attack with it and then you can't attack and block for a turn. And you also can't fly, and you also don't get any like overwhelm or other evasion. You can't even have flying for that evasion. And then you get like +9, like just flat +9/+9 stats for 7. Like who wants that? Sure, you can put it on an endurance unit. That makes it a bit better, because then the stun downside doesn't matter. But who wants weapons that cost 7 and give this many stats to just get like jump blocked or removal? Card is terrible. Like it's not even great in limited. And now we have the Great Kiln Titan. This card is amazing. Gonna be the top end for the new likely Praxis Sentinel Explorer type ramp deck. Might also be something to kiln, to like combustion cell and kindle out aggressively and stuff like that. Card is pretty powerful. It's a 9/7 for 8. When you play a relic, deal damage equal to its cost to an enemy. So there's some more brutal synergy there. So this card can really take over games. and at the start of your turn, play the top card of your deck. At the end of your turn, play the top card of your deck. So if you happen to play a relic this way, you even get to shoot right away. Like if you play this and then at the end of turn you flip a Mysterium Orb, you can just shoot 3 somewhere and get a Mysterium Orb. To be fair, the Mysterium Orb's not going to do that much anymore. So a lot of your relics won't do that much later in the game, so this basically turns them into relevant cards again when you already have all the power you need. And last but not least, we have Heroic Bravo. Overwhelm Bond, 4/4 Gunslinger. When you bond Heroic Bravo, he deals 2 damage to an enemy. He costs 8 though, so just overcosted and like underpowered. Might be okay in limited because it has removal potential and okay stats. So in limited this might be a decent filler. Not sure if it's like gonna be better than that, but yeah. Alright, that concludes the review of the Fire Faction. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. Let me know in the comments what you think about my evaluations, where you disagree, or if you have any questions. And I will do this for each faction in the next couple of days, and at the end discuss the multi-faction cards in one last video to give you the full scoop of what I think about all the new cards. Spoiler alert, I love the new set. It's really sweet and interesting. It's everything we kind of hoped Omens of the Past would be. It's interesting, it's new, it's fresh, it's inspiring, it's constructed relevant, it's has all tons of potential for new synergies and new archetypes and stuff. New dimensions of the deck, it's great. Alright, that's it for the first Eternal Review video with the Fire Faction. As usual, if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more future content. Turn on the notification icon to not miss any new videos. I'll put out plenty of content in the next couple of days with the new set out. And that's it again for this video. I'm Manu S. Thank you for watching. I'm out. Bye.